This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Democratic National Committee Chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz talks about working together and dialing down the vitriol in Washington. Feminist Marianne Schnall discusses what it will take for the nation to elect a woman president. And Bill Press interviews the always provocative governor of Montana, Brian Schweitzer. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight, and follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Congresswoman and DNC Chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz has written a book that could serve as a roadmap for Democratic priorities. She also says Obamacare is a cake on its way to being baked. And joining us today on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Debbie Wasserman Schultz is a member of Congress from South Florida, representing the 23rd District, and serves as chair of the Democratic National Committee. She has written a book laying out the long view of where America ought to be. It is titled, For the Next Generation, a wake-up call to solving our nation's problems. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you, Jim. Great to be with you.
Now, what are the key problems the next generation has to deal with? Of course, I guess that question, we could be here a while.
Yeah, I know exactly. That's why I stopped at 14 chapters in the book, plus the intro and the conclusion. I could have written a whole bunch more, but really, what's right in front of us that is so important to get people engaged in are obviously focusing on getting our economy turned around, making sure we can create jobs, investing in our nation's infrastructure, which helps with job creation, and also make sure that we don't have cars hurtling over bridges that are collapsing underneath them, and getting traffic off of our roads and supporting mass transit, making sure that we focus on really dealing with global warming and climate change, focusing on preserving our environment, making sure that we fully implement the Affordable Care Act and get everybody access to quality, affordable health care, education. As a mom, that's so critical. Every mom that I know worries about making sure their child is getting the best education possible so they can prepare for the path they choose in life. And then more generally, the importance of working together and dialing down some of the vitriol and the polarization that exists in Washington and in too many state capitals because of the advent of the Tea Party, so that we can get some of these really burgeoning issues solved.
Mm-hmm. Now, as you mentioned, you're a mom. You emphasize children's needs, but you represent a constituency largely made up of seniors. Is there going to be a generational conflict in the future?
Oh, on the contrary, I do have a lot of seniors in my district, but also tens of thousands of families with children, and seniors. It's so funny that the perception is always, and I've represented my community for 21 years now, and always had a senior heavy district. But the perception by people who don't live among a very big percentage of seniors is always that, there's always this conflict. Seniors, I've found, their grandparents, their parents, they want what's best for the next generation. And I've found in my community, for example, that when we're trying to pass a bond issue, to build more schools, or a tax increase for a local tax increase for health care, those items, they generally pass on the shoulders of the seniors because they've lived through the unfortunate choices that have been made and know that we need to make sure that we're focused on the future.
One issue on which you have been outspoken is restricting the sale of firearms. And your good friend Gabby Giffords is touring the country speaking out. But the outlook doesn't seem, as I think we all should be. But the outlook doesn't really seem very optimistic, does it?
Well, Gabby is the most optimistic person that I know and always has been. Mm-hmm. And I think that when you're dealing with an incredibly thorny and challenging issue like gun safety and trying to limit access to firearms to only those who can legally possess them, and making sure that we are dealing with the mental health challenges that unfortunately result in many of these firearm tragedies. You have to look at it in the short term and in the long term. And I know Gabby and others are trying to impact the outcome of elections so that we can make sure that we're electing people who support and embrace the overwhelming majority of Americans' opinion that we should have common sense gun safety laws like background checks so you keep weapons out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them, and reform, limiting the size of magazine clips so that it's not possible for Tucson shootings like Gabby went through to happen, because there isn't a 30 clip magazine that someone can just drop into that weapon to reload faster. But I think she also, and I know she also looks at it as a marathon as well as a sprint. We want to try to get done in the short term what is possible, but then we've got to make investments for the long term, and that's why she's her organization, Americans for Responsible Solutions, is an advocacy organization that is focused on helping to win over lawmakers and help them understand why these are the priorities of so many Americans, and also in the short term to make a difference in elections. And if you look back to to the election in November of 2013, when Terry McAuliffe was elected, Gabby's organization and the Bloomberg organization made a big difference, I think, in the resources they put in that focused on turning out pro-gun safety voters.
We're speaking with Debbie Wasserman Schultz, representative from Florida's 23rd Congressional District, also chair of the Democratic National Committee and author of For the Next Generation, a wake-up call to solving our nation's problems. What do you think the future of the ACA, Obamacare, is? I mean, does it depend on the next election?
Oh, I think I really think we're past the point where the implementation of the Affordable Care Act is dependent on the outcome of an election. I mean, President Obama was reelected with the Affordable Care Act's implementation as one of the central questions, and he was reelected, by certainly a pretty wide margin. We're in the midst of implementation. There are some problems with the website. There are obviously some other challenges that will arise as we go forward. But I think this is a cake that's on its way to being baked, because the benefits that people know that they are already receiving and that they will receive in our breast cancer survivors like me, and the 150 million people approximately that have a pre-existing condition in this country, we know on January 1st of next year we're going to have the peace of mind that an insurance company can never again drop us or deny us coverage for that pre-existing condition. And what the Republicans, led by the Tea Party, are trying to do is take away that peace of mind. And I can tell you, I think that there's an army of those folks that are simply never going to allow that peace of mind to be taken away from us again.
You mentioned having to have that awful fight with breast cancer.
Yes.
What would it have been like if you didn't have the kind of insurance coverage afforded to members of Congress?
Well, that was actually one of my first thoughts right after I got the diagnosis almost 6 years ago now, that thank God I had really decent insurance coverage, and I didn't have to worry about what so many women, Jim, have told me since I shared my own story publicly, that they've had to go through, that they were underinsured. In other words, their deductible and their copay were so high that when they found out they had breast cancer, they had to choose between either the chemo or the radiation because they couldn't afford the deductibles and the copays on both. That angst is a thing of the past, thanks to the Affordable Care Act, because those items are covered, and you have a minimum floor of benefits through which millions of Americans are now going to be able to count on, that they don't have to worry about substandard health care coverage. And then those who, even worse for people who didn't have coverage because they would delay going to the doctor. I thankfully, because I was able to go right to the doctor when I found the lump, I was doing a self-exam in the shower, and I had just had my first mammogram after turning 40, and it was a clean mammogram. But I still did a self-exam and found the lump myself, and then was able to go right to the doctor because I knew what was normal for me, so I knew when something felt different. I have talked to so many women who put off going to the doctor because they're dreading that it is actually something, and if it's something, they can't afford the coverage. And so they're diagnosed at a later stage, and that those healthcare costs are more significant, and their treatment is more significant, and their chance for survival is a lot lower.
All right, so I'm going to change the subject a little bit here. What are you, as chair of the Democratic National Committee, doing to fight the massive voter suppression by the states, and including your own state of Florida?
We've been quite aggressive, all the way through the 2012 election. From the beginning of the 2010 elections of Tea Party governors and legislatures, who, immediately turned to adopting voter suppression laws because, it's clear that they know they can't win elections on the merits, so they're trying to, rig the outcome, and they've been doing that by passing restrictive photo ID laws. It's one thing to pass a photo ID law, which is totally unnecessary in order to ensure the integrity of an election. But what these voter suppression laws are doing is doubling down on those. So in Texas, you've seen that even the author and principal pusher, Greg Abbott, who's going to be the Republican candidate for governor in 2014, even he had to cast a provisional ballot under his own photo ID law because his name on his license didn't match the name on his voter registration. I mean, that's just utterly ridiculous to throw obstacles in the path, and that's disproportionately impactful, of course, on minorities, on women, and that's by design. And what we're doing at the DNC is we have our Voting Rights Institute, which is led by Pratt Wiley. It was led by Will Crossley during the 2012 election, and we've been very aggressive at the DNC, filing lawsuits where necessary, at using all the mechanisms state by state that are available to us to combat the voter suppression laws. And in many of those cases leading up to 2012, we were able to be a part of a team with our allies at knocking down at some of those voter suppression laws. And in Florida in particular, we helped make sure that some of those were turned back, the limitations on early voting and the restrictions on voter registration drives that Rick Scott was hell-bent on putting into place, because he knew that the higher the turnout, the worse off Republican candidates are. So we're going to be very aggressive, and that's one of the four pillars that I talked about being the DNC's focus over the next number of years, making sure that we not only kick off a national voter registration drive so that we can expand our map, focus on making sure that we can turn states like Texas and Arizona and Georgia to purple and then to blue, but also to focus on voter protection and making sure that we expand the franchise while the Republicans are trying to limit it.
Okay. Now, of course, I've got to jump around all over the place on lots of different topics.
That's how the book is, too.
Yeah. Your husband's a banker. How did his experience inform your understanding and vote on the Wall Street bailout? I mean, what is the responsibility of the nation's banks, especially those that are too big to fail?
Yeah, my husband is actually a community banker. He works for a bank that has 9 branches, and so the community banks are in a totally different category and situation. What my husband's experience, and in talking to him and the folks he works with, is that it's really important that we make sure that the access to capital that community banks provide, that are the folks who are deciding locally whether people can get access to loans or home mortgages, loans to start businesses, that doesn't become a thing of the past, and that those small community banks are not eclipsed by massive banks who are continuing to develop these very complicated, twisted financial products that are hard to unravel and that were largely unregulated. So I think the Dodd-Frank law, which I proudly voted for, was an important reform. Of course, that the Tea Party Republicans are still trying to unravel and undo, but that at the same time, while those reforms were important, we have to make sure that we strike a balance. There was no one, the fox was watching the hen house before Dodd-Frank, but you don't want to go so overboard that you are tightening the regulation so much that it makes access to capital for our small business owners and for people who want to be able to buy a home or use a line of credit to make a financial investment to more challenging. So striking that balance as we go forward, and again, adjusting Dodd-Frank to strike that balance is, I think, going to be really important.
Historically, middle ground has worked in so many ways, right?
Yes, it's amazing. It's not very sexy or cool, apparently, to be embracing the middle ground, but that is historically how we have gotten things done in America. And you know what? Hopefully people will read For the Next Generation, and there's a lot of different issues covered in it, but I hope people take a look at it and say, you know what, education's an issue that matters the most to me, and this is how I'm going to be able to figure out how I can make a difference in that area. And at the end of the book, Jim, I have a list of organizations that we talk about in the book that are doing so many wonderful things, and how to contact them, because I know when you have so many things going on in your life, particularly parents who are balancing all the stuff they've got, that if they close the book and think, okay, now I've got to figure out how to make a difference, forget it. The odds of them actually following up are small, but we give them a way to just make sure they can reach out right from when they turn the last page of the book.
Well, and obviously you speak from experience. Debbie Wasserman Schultz represents Florida's 23rd Congressional District, also serves as chair of the Democratic National Committee, and the book, For the Next Generation, A Wake-Up Call to Solving Our Nation's Problems. Congresswoman, thank you so much for your time today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
We enjoyed it. And this is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going, and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. Having more women in elective office will produce better outcomes overall, says feminist author Marianne Schnall. She has compiled interviews with a wide range of women about what it will take to elect a female president. And that's coming up in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Timmy Geithner has landed. The Secretary of the Treasury in President Obama's first term resigned early this year, and we lost track of him for months. But in November, Geithner reappeared, having spun himself through Washington's revolving door, whoosh, 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 and flung himself all the way up to Wall Street, landing softly in the cushy quarters of Warburg Pincus, one of America's top 10 private equity empires. Yes, the guy who was responsible for rescuing and regulating Wall Street's too-big-to-fail multi-billion-dollar financial casinos is now president of one. Writing in the New Yorker magazine, Andrew Huszar says we need not be surprised that the former Treasury chief is cashing in on his insider knowledge and contacts. Huszar worked at the New York Federal Reserve Bank when Geithner became president of that powerful supervisor of Wall Street firms. He says that rather than promoting knowledgeable regulators from within the Fed, Geithner broke with tradition and prudence to put top bankers from J.P. Morgan Chase, American Express, Goldman Sachs, and other powerhouse firms in key regulatory positions. In other words, the new honcho built his own revolving door in the New York Fed, bringing in bankers to regulate themselves. Thus, when Obama promoted Geithner to head the Treasury Department, Huszar was again unsurprised that our nation's overseer of banksters quickly proved to be their comforter and protector. Geithner never publicly advocated for the truly forceful and clean revamp of Wall Street, writes Huszar, instead using his influence to convince Obama and other lawmakers to be more accommodating to the big banks. This is Jim Hightower saying, whether spinning from the inside out or from the outside in, Geithner is proof that the Washington Wall Street revolving door serves bankers, not the public interest. We need to weld it shut.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Electing a female president would be a victory for all women and their daughters, says feminist author Marianne Schnall, who adds it will take the right candidate and one with a thick skin. And joining us now on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Marianne Schnall is a widely published writer and interviewer who is the founder and executive director of feminist.com, which is a leading women's website and nonprofit organization. Her recent book is a series of interviews with prominent politicians and thought leaders. It's called What Will It Take to Make a Woman President? Marianne Schnall, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Now, you ask in the title of your new book, what will it take to make a woman president? I know it's a complex question, but can you give us somewhat of a brief response to that question?
Well, yes, it is a complex question, and it obviously took many interviews and hundreds of pages in a print book that spilled over into an ebook to try to come up with some of the answers. And what I ultimately discovered is there's no one solution or one answer to the challenges, but it requires an open dialogue and sort of looking at these themes through a variety of lenses. But in general, I think, first of all, it will take the right candidate. And it's going to take more women to step up and be willing to be the first. Just as it was difficult for Obama to be the first black president, I think any woman who runs will need a very thick skin to sort of take the pushback and the inevitable national conversation around gender in the presidency that I think will just, inevitably result. But I also think it will take both women and men supporting women candidates that do run and making sure we encourage women and girls to enter the pipeline and not shy away from positions of leadership.
Everybody's eyes seem to be on Hillary Clinton. Is she going to be, in your opinion, the Democratic nominee, and what obstacles would she face if nominated?
Well, whether Hillary will run is certainly the million-dollar question right now, and obviously I don't know if she won, but I personally hope so. I have to say her name came up, as you can imagine, quite frequently in my interviews. But whether she ran or Michelle Bachmann, I really think the challenges for women would be the same. In sort of the same way there were unique challenges for Obama as the first African-American man who ran as president. But ultimately, I think that times have changed when you think back to when Shirley Chisholm became the first woman to run for president in 1972. So hopefully there will be many less obstacles that women will need to face.
There are a lot of people that are going to disagree with you on whether it's Hillary or Michelle Bachmann. People would say, no, wait a minute. When you look at the way Michelle Bachmann's, what she's standing for and that kind of thing, it's so vastly different from Hillary. There are going to be plenty of people that say, no, I'd rather have a man. And the other way around, too, for the other side.
I guess I was answering it more through the lens of as a woman, running for president rather than looking at them both specifically as candidates. Obviously, those are very different examples, and that is sort of what I'm trying to say in this book is obviously this isn't about gender. It's really about the issues and the consciousness of the person that is running.
Yeah. Okay. Now, let's say she doesn't run, Hillary. Which Democratic women are on the bench?
Well, I keep having to go back to just point out that I'm a journalist and I'm not a political strategist, so I'm not necessarily an expert on this. But from the many people that I spoke with, a lot of people brought up New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, who I think would be a great choice. I've also heard Elizabeth Warren's name come up as well. And I also spoke to Stephanie Shryock, who is the president of Emily's List, and she brought up several names like Secretary Napolitano, Secretary Sebelius, Amy Klobuchar in Minnesota, Jean Shaheen, who was the first woman who served both as governor and United States senator. So there seem to be a lot of women who would be great candidates. I actually thought Nancy Pelosi would be a great potential candidate, but when I interviewed her for this project, she seemed to have ruled that out, at least for now.
It's interesting. You brought up, just a myriad of folks that would seem very qualified for it, and yet we don't hear anybody else's name but Hillary Clinton, really. Does that strike you as odd that these other names aren't being brought up? I mean, into the more public discussions.
Well, I just think, from all of my interviews, and again, I would rarely bring her up. Her name would just come up. She is seemingly uniquely positioned and qualified to be in the most likely candidates and for this to be our first woman president. So I think that's just happens to be a true, statement at the times. I mean, I had people that I interviewed where I'd say, do you think that you will see a woman president in your lifetime? And a lot of people were very bluntly to say, well, yes, if Hillary runs. Obviously she does seem to have a lot of the, qualities and preconditions and experience and skills that what you would think that you would need in order to, be able to actually reach the Oval Office. And it does seem like she has so much momentum and buzz around her that would support her.
Yeah, and she certainly does have a vast amount of experience in all different levels. So we're speaking with Marianne Schnall, who is the founder and executive director of feminist.com. Her recent book is What Will It Take to Make a Woman President? Now, of course, raising the profile of women in politics, Marianne, is not just a Democratic Party issue. What are Republicans doing? And would you and the progressive women you interviewed for the book accept a conservative president who may happen to be a woman?
Well, in my opinion, and of many of those that I interviewed, Democrat and Republican, having a woman of any party as president would be a victory for all women and for our daughters who are watching. But, as I keep sort of stressing, regardless of party, it is the qualifications, the political views, and the consciousness of the person and their ability to lead the country that, ultimately matters.
Talk a little bit about Oklahoma Governor Mary Fallin, to whom you devote a chapter. She is quite conservative, but also has an interesting history of being the mother of young children when her career began, becoming a single mother, and then remarrying, all while in the public eye. Are there any lessons that others can draw from her?
I really enjoyed talking to Mary Fallin. I thought she was great. I took a lot away from that interview. One of the things I took was the notion that, she kept talking about power having to come from within. And, she had some great quotes about, you have to go over the mountain, not under it, whatever that mountain might be. She also talked about her experiences. She said that her favorite saying was, quote, setbacks are always an opportunity for a comeback. And I think, that's important that, sort of she had this very survivor attitude, and that in politics, as with life, it's the people who are kind of willing to dust themselves off and step up again that are usually those who succeed. And certainly, politics these days is a tough business. I also took away from that interview the importance of taking risks and standing up for what you believe is right. I mean, she offered some great stories about doing that and sort of standing up for your principles, not caring what other people think. But I thought one of the most important things that came out of that interview was that she showed that it is possible for women to juggle a political career and family, which she did, quite impressively. Not only raising young children as a single mother, but also taking care of her elderly mother at the same time as well.
That is pretty amazing. Now, before we let you go, you and some of those you've talked with have said that having a woman president is more than just symbolic. What do you mean?
Well, I mean, it certainly would be a momentous moment for America. And I don't think you can underestimate the power of that symbol for what it would mean for my daughters and for all the young girls out there who could then imagine themselves, as future presidents and envision themselves as leaders in all sectors of society. But not only would having a woman president be precedent-setting, it would have practical implications. And when I interviewed Senator Gillibrand, she told me, quote, when we're actually trying to look at issues like the economy, solving these problems, I feel that if more women's voices were heard, if more women were part of decision-making, our outcomes would be better. And a lot of studies support that. A lot of studies show that when women are on corporate boards, companies do better. My own experiences in Congress is when women are on committees and at hearings, the nature of the discussion is different and the outcomes are better. We reach better solutions, better decisions are made. And then, as Nicholas Kristof put it to me, quote, this is not something that's going to benefit the women of America. It's something that's going to benefit all of America. So, ultimately, my hope is that this book sparks, national conversation about all of these themes, and also marks a culture shift and sort of a pivotal moment in a movement that, traces its roots all the way back to the suffragette and hopefully ultimately carries us to the highest public office in this land. The thing I kept hearing again and again in my interviews is now is the time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Marianne Schnall, founder and executive director of feminist.com. Her book, which is a series of interviews with prominent politicians and thought leaders, titled What Will It Take to Make a Woman President? Marianne, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed talking to you.
You're quite welcome. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guest, the always provocative and entertaining Brian Schweitzer, governor of Montana.
Well, there are lots of problems facing this country today, but there's a man who's got the answer to them all. He is a good friend of ours. Love having him in studio. We'll even talk to him when he's 1,000 miles away or more. Former governor of Montana, now senior vice president of Venn Squared Communications, none other than Brian Schweitzer. Governor, good morning. Been a long time.
Well, it's good to speak to you. And listen, I could use a scarf right now because I'm going to give you the weather report of my Georgetown. I live on Georgetown Lake in Montana.
Yeah.
That's a lake at 6,500 feet. And this morning the temperature is 1 degree below zero.
Oh, no.
No, it'll get a lot colder. It'll get a lot colder. But, a nice scarf would, not only would it keep me warm, it would kind of make me into a metrosexual.
I've heard rumors about you. Well, where to go? Go to the website, BillPressShow.com, and then Carol Press Scarves. There it is. You can go there and send your wife there. So listen, what are you up to these days, Governor? First of all, before we get into the serious issues.
Well, right after I finished being governor in January, I launched a hostile takeover of the largest publicly traded company in Montana. This is a mining company, but it's a green metals mining company. You see, platinum and palladium are metals that are used in catalytic converters that all of the cars in the United States and around the world are using to convert the dangerous carbon monoxide gases into carbon dioxide. And we're the only producer of these metals outside of Russia and South Africa. And the management was making some really big mistakes there, and they were, honestly, had they continued, they could have threatened the enterprise. And it is the most strategic metal produced in the United States. We launched a hostile takeover, and now I'm chairman of the board of that mining company, and I'm very proud of the work that we're doing there. And there's 1,700 people working here in Montana that's just doing a wonderful job.
Yeah, and
they're represented by the steelworkers.
It's platinum and
palladium.
Palladium. Wow, represented by the steelworkers we're the colorful president there, right?
Yes, Leo Gerard.
Leo Gerard, yeah, who's by the way, a sponsor of the Bill Press Show. So there you go. We're in the same company here, Governor.
Well, we've completed the circle. Now all you've got to do is announce that in addition to those beautiful scarves for the holiday season, platinum and palladium rings are just wonderful.
All right. You send us the information, and we'll plug them as well.
All right. We're done with the cheap advertising.
All right. But one other question. A lot of us were disappointed that you didn't join us here in Washington as a member of the United States Senate. We thought that we might see you in the Senate race in Montana. You decided not to do so. Why?
Well, unfortunately, as you know, I say what's on my mind, and I was quoted widely as saying that I wasn't goofy enough to be a member of Congress or senile enough to be in the United States Senate. Look, I like getting things done. When you're a governor, you get things done. Every state has the same role. It's a business, actually, the business of running a state.
Right.
And if you were to compare the budgets of all 50 states and put them on a pie chart, they'd all look the same. 85% of the money in every state is spent to do three things. We educate, we medicate, we incarcerate. And those, you've got a job every single day of keeping well-trained and great teachers in front of eager students and taking care of the disabled, making sure that the elderly and disabled, the people who have fallen through the safety net are protected. And then, of course, there are some bad guys that you have to keep locked up. Mm-hmm. And so in all 50 states, we have a responsibility to get that done. And so you can work on and actually make some changes. In Montana, we reformed our education system, put more new money in education than any time in history, and at the end of a 6-year period, Montana had increased the percent of our adult population with a college degree at the fastest rate in the country. We increased by 6%. That's 10 times the average of the other 49 states. We ran the largest budget surpluses in the history of Montana all 8 years that I was governor. We reformed the correction system because 90% of the people we have in our jails have an alcohol or drug problem, and we weren't doing anything about it. 50% of them have mental illness. So we were getting them back into their families, back into their communities, getting them on counseling, making them pee in a bottle. If they reoffended, well, we'd tune them up a little bit, but we just didn't throw them in the top bunk and give them 3 squares a day for 5 years. That didn't make any sense.
Right. But, as a transition here, but if you talk about where the states and the governors have a job and they get the job done, that is certainly proven to be true in many states with this Affordable Care Act and the implementation of health care, as contrasted with the federal website. How is this playing in Montana?
Well, the difficulty in Montana, like a lot of other states, is that the legislatures and or the governors have refused to expand Medicaid. Now, even though the federal government was saying that if you make less than 133% of federal poverty, then you qualify to be in Medicaid, and we will pay the cost of that expansion. Many states, well, virtually every Republican governor, and many states like Montana, where you have a Republican legislature and a Democratic governor, refuse to expand Medicaid. So even though there is going to be a safety net, and a portion of your insurance will be paid by the government above 133% of poverty, about $30,000 for a family of 4. Below that, there's no safety net in more than half of America. So this thing's got some real problems on the bottom end of it. Now, honest to God, let's roll back to when they call it Obamacare, but it was actually written in the Senate Finance Committee. People kind of forgotten about that. It was written by the insurance industry for the insurance industry, and now instead of using Medicare, which is in every county in every state as the safety net, they turned to Medicaid. They never asked a single governor's opinion. Had they asked any of us before they put this in the provisions, every governor, Democrats and Republicans alike, would say, don't use Medicaid, use Medicare.
Well, don't you think, in fact, to show maybe revealing myself as some ultra-liberal here, but it seemed to me even the whole approach early on would have been better if they just called it Medicare for everybody, and rather than go through all the hoops with this Obamacare and the private insurance, right?
Look, I don't know if you're an ultra-liberal or just a common-sense thinker. Here's my proposal. It fits on the back of an envelope. Number one, you have national health insurance reform, which says you can't sell a policy that discriminates against women like we do in 46 states. You can't sell a policy that discriminates against people with pre-existing conditions. You can't have annual caps. You can't have lifetime caps. You have to cover mental health and oncology. And if you're selling an insurance policy, it has to have those provisions. That's point number one.
Right.
Point number two, every citizen in the United States either has to buy private insurance or you buy your way into Medicare. If you make more than $100,000 a year, we'll post a premium. You pay 100%, you're into Medicare. If you make $75,000 to $100,000, you pay 75%. We'll subsidize 25%. $50,000, 50/50, 25, 75, 25. It's done. It fit on the back of an envelope. We have Medicare in every single community. Now, there's a couple of things we're going to do. We're going to do, unlike what Congress has done, we're going to negotiate to buy our prescription drugs so we don't pay 3 times as much as the rest of the world. And medical devices as well. Same, both of those. Yeah. And then we're going to use our community health care systems so that if you are in Medicare, you don't pay a copay and there will be no deductible if you go to your community health care system where you have healthcare professionals that just provide the health care for you, not sell you a bunch of extra procedures you didn't need, like what happens in the private healthcare system. We could have decreased the cost of health care in the first year by 25% in this country, and we could have, bent that cost curve through time so that instead of paying 18% of our GDP for health care and the rest of the industrialized world's paying around 10%, we'd be back at 15, working our way to 11.
So when you look at it from your perspective and your experience and from your distance from Washington, do you think they're going to get Obamacare fixed, up and running, or is it just going to collapse?
Stumble to the finish line, but it will not fix the problem that we have. It doesn't have any of the tools in the toolbox to challenge the expenses that we have. We're going to continue with a for-profit system. 16% of the dollars that we spend on health care will continue to go poof, up in smoke, go to the insurance companies. United Healthcare, by the way, helped write the website that you don't like, and their CEO makes $97 million a year. And take a look at the health insurance companies, what they've been trading on the exchanges. They are exploding on the upside because everybody knows that this health care law will do a couple of things. It'll cover some more people, of course, but it's also going to make health insurance companies very rich.
Governor Brian Schweitzer, he is out of the governor's office, but he's still right in the heart of all the public policy issues of the day. Joining us on our newsline from Montana, we'll come back with the governor. Governor, hold on there just a second. Got to take a quick break. Come back with Governor Brian Schweitzer. By the way, Governor, always willing. He loves hearing from you. Maybe about we want to find out where to get one of those platinum or palladium rings, or a question on health care, Medicare. 866-55-PRESS, the Bill Press Show, Tuesday morning. Governor, welcome back. We don't talk a lot about foreign policy on this program, but I do want to get your take on this. President Obama has been saying all along, talking about Iran, right, that the last thing we can do is allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon. And the way we're going to prevent them from doing so is from being able to sit down, negotiate with them, get them to agree to roll back their nuclear program, in return for which we're willing to lift some of the sanctions. But you talk about members of the Senate, they don't seem to want to go along with this. They think we just need to increase the sanctions, and any talks with Iran are worthless. What's your take on it?
Well, so those would be most of the same members of the Senate who voted to go to war in Iraq? So you've asked the Jackass Committee to offer their opinion about the future of the world? Listen, first off, you got to understand a little bit about the Middle East. Some of you know that I lived in the Middle East for 7 years, not in the oil business. I'm an irrigation engineer. I was in Libya, then I was in Saudi Arabia, so I kind of understand what's going on there. Mahab, ahlan wa sahlan to you Arabic speakers out there. Look, after World War II, Britain and France and the United States split up the oil world. France got to have Iraq oil, England got to have the oil in Iran, and we got to have Saudi Arabia. There were no good guys there. We just wanted oil. Well, in 1953, the Iranians were getting a little uppity, and they elected a prime minister. They had elections in the Middle East. Silly them, huh? Right. British Petroleum tried to get first the Truman administration and the English to engineer a coup. They wouldn't do it, so they had to wait till 53. And the CIA engineered that coup. We threw out their elected person, installed our Shah of Iran, so that we went back to, the kind of government we like in the Middle East, which is not a democracy, which is a friend who happens to be a tough SOB and controls their country. And everything went good again. British Petroleum started getting their oil and all the rest of it. So, and you got to understand another thing, and that is that Iran are Persians, and the rest of the Middle East are Arabs. The Persians have been about 4 steps ahead of the Arabs for the last 3,000 years, and they don't like each other. And so the Saudis, who have a functional monarchy and who have been our bedrock in the Middle East because, well, they were our oil with Aramco, the American oil company, they now are very nervous because if we become friends with Iran like we were during the times of the Shah, then we don't need the Saudis as much as we had in the past. And here's the newsflash for you. Within the next 48 months, the United States is going to surpass both Russia and Saudi Arabia as the largest oil producer. And within 5 years, we will be in the export business of oil. Now, why do we need to prop up our major contributor, or competitor, the Saudis, in the New World? Actually, if we tip the balance and we become sort of allies with both Iran and Saudi Arabia, and we're able to thread the needle and take care of our friends, the Israelis, then we will be in the business of exporting oil. The Saudis or whoever else, maybe the Chinese, maybe the Japanese, maybe the Europeans are going to have to protect those oil lanes because we can bring our men and women home. We no longer have to fight oil wars all over the world, and we can stop the Iranians from expanding their nuke ambitions, which will stop the Saudis and Kuwaitis and Egyptians from even thinking about getting nukes.
So you think the president's on the right track in Iran?
He's on the right track. Now, I know it makes our allies nervous because the only thing that our allies agree on, that's the Egyptians, the Israelis, the Kuwaitis, and the Saudis. They don't like each other. None of them like each other. But the only thing they agree on right now is that the most dangerous actor in the Middle East is Iran. And by the way, we created this problem because during the 80s, we were financing Saddam Hussein to fight a war with Iran.
Yep.
We were supplying the equipment, the material, and the poison gas, by the way, the weapons of mass destruction, so that he would poison the Iranians to keep them in check. And then, inexplicably, when George W. Bush cooked up this stuff about Iraq, Saddam Hussein's a bad guy, but so's everybody else in the neighborhood, and we created a vacuum in Iraq, that allowed Iran to expand their ambitions, scared the hell out of our neighbors. Any member of the United States Senate who voted to go to war in Iraq ought to shut their mouth.
All right. Right from Governor Brian Schweitzer. Now, we just got about 30 seconds. We've got to get your take. I want to come back home for just a second here. There's a lot of talk about 2016, but I want you to tell us how important it is, instead of focusing on 2016, isn't it more important to focus on 2014 and getting Democratic governors elected in state after state after state?
Well, it sure helped because, that's the message that folks hear back home. There isn't anybody in any state anymore that particularly likes or trusts any member of Congress. But whether they're a blue state or a red state, every single day they get up in the morning and they see that there's a governor in their state that's getting some things done. Now, if you're the governor of New Jersey and you think you're going to run for president, he says he's got a record. He does. They have the highest unemployment and highest taxes in America. Or if you're the governor of Wisconsin and you say, the problem in Washington, D.C. is they don't seem to get along. Wait a minute. Wasn't it the governor of Wisconsin that had riots in the Capitol?
Right.
So,
right.
I don't know that those are the records that are necessarily going to get them to the White House in 2016, but a good record is a good start.
All right. Hey, Governor, we miss you. Next time you're in Washington, you got to come by and sit down in the studio with us again.
Remember my 72-hour rule, though. I'm only there for less than 72 hours, or I have to shower with that stuff I use on my dogs when they get sprayed by a skunk to get the smell off.
Well, give us some of those 72 hours. Brian Schweitzer, great to talk to you, Governor.
Adios.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Marianne Schnall, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to America.